Good afternoon. I'm trying to set up a different setting this time. Where we left off, it will be our fifth study in the book of Judges, and the last lesson. The first lesson was an intro. The second was chapter 1, basically. The third was chapter 2 and the first 6 verses of chapter 3. And then the last one, the fourth one, was the chapter 17 and the first 6 verses of chapter 18. And that's where we left off. And the reason why we're doing it in this order is this is closer to chronological order. It's not the order of the chapters, it's the order of when it happened. And chapters 17 and 18 are a perfect example as to why Israel needed judges, and they really needed better priests. For some reason, they are just clueless. They have mixed so much with the other those who live around them who worship false gods that they have incorporated them into their own lives. And we've met this young man, Micah, and we briefly heard his mother. And I just wanted to go back and explain, because I didn't have my notes with me. I had these notes, but I didn't have them. I couldn't find them when we did the last lesson. When at the very beginning of chapter 17, when it says that someone had stolen 1,100 shekels of silver, we're talking 28 pounds of silver. Not the cost of 28 pounds of silver today, but what could have been bought with 28 pounds of silver then. In today's numbers, we're talking close to $500,000 worth of silver for his day and time. He stole so obviously this family's got money, because they have $500,000 worth of silver. And so if you're into kilos, it's about 13 kilos. And so what the silver that the mother gives to the silversmith to make the carved image and the cast idol is approximately 5 pounds of silver. And so we're talking between $80,000-$90,000 worth of silver purchase power back then. That's a lot of money to spend on idols. That's quite an investment when it comes to these idols that they've created. So they have really put out, the red carpet for these false gods. And to remind you of what we're talking about, and actually, you know what? I'm going to remind you when we get to it, because one of my problems, because this is such a large book, 21 chapters, one of my problems is that I have to keep ahead in my studies so that I know what's coming up when I do this study. And so I tend to forget what I haven't covered yet. So I'm going to stop with all this pre-stuff, and we're going to start where we left off in the last lesson. And as we come to things, I will show them to you. Okay? So we are now in the book of Judges, obviously, chapter 18, beginning with verse 7. Okay? Judges 18:7. And this is what it says. So, the 5 men left and came to Laish, where they saw that the people were living in safety, like the Sidonians, unsuspecting and secure. And since their land lacked nothing, they were prosperous. Also, they lived a long way from the Sidonians and had no relationship with anyone else. The city of Sidon, Sidonians, obviously the people who lived in Laish were had something, a relationship with Sidonians. yet they're living too far away from Sidon and amongst Arameans, where the Aramaic language comes from, Arameans, Canaanites from that area. But they're prosperous, yet they're not really power hungry. Okay? When they, we continue in verse 8, when they returned to Zorah and Eshtaol, their brothers asked them, "How did you find things?" They answered, "Come on, let's attack them. We have seen that the land is very good. Aren't you going to do something? Don't hesitate to go there and take it over. When you get there, you will find an unsuspecting people and a spacious land that God has put into your hands, a land that lacks nothing whatever." Then, verse 11, then 600 men from the clan of the Danites, armed for battle, set out from Zorah and Eshtaol. On their way, they set up camp near Kiriath Jearim in Judah. This is why the place west of Kiriath Jearim is called Mahanan Dan to this day. And Mahanan Dan means Dan's camp. From there, they went on to the hill country of Ephraim and came to Micah's house. Then the 5 men who had spied out the land of Laish said to their brothers, "Do you know that one of these houses has an ephod, other household gods, a carved image, and a cast idol? Now you know what to do." So they turned in there, went to the house of the young Levite at Micah's place, and greeted him. The 600 Danites, armed for battle, stood at the entrance to the gate. The 5 men who had spied out the land went inside and took the carved idol, image, the ephod, and the other household gods, and the cast idol, while the priest and the 600 armed men stood at the entrance to the gate. When these men went into Micah's house and took the carved image, and the ephod, and the other household gods, and the cast idol, the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" And they answered, "Be quiet. Don't say a word. Come with us and be our father and priest. Isn't it better that you serve a tribe and a clan in Israel as priest rather than just one man's household?" Then the priest was glad. He took the ephod, the other household gods, and the carved image and went along with the people. And we'll stop there for just a minute. Not a lot. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. These 5 spies that we met earlier in chapter 18, they made their way up from Judah into Ephraim, recognized the voice of the priest having a Judah accent, and talked with him, found out what he was doing, and then they went on, and they went up to, they found this place called Laish, and they're like, "Wow, this is beautiful." And they're weak, they can't defend themselves. I just remembered something, and I'm pulling up Facebook as we talk. Because I had this and I thought I might print it, and then I forgot, and since now's the time, I want to definitely do it. So here they are traveling. They decide they go back to the cities where they've been living, and tell their relatives there, because they're all Danites, "Come on, we can do this. You can't believe what we can get there and how easy it's going to be. It behooves us to go and just take over this city." So 600 men gird up and get ready and go, and make their way to, I found the place, so when we get to it, I have the pictures ready. So they make their way up there, and on their way, they stop at Micah's house, and they confiscate all of those gods and the Levite as priest. And it's like, hey, don't you want to be our priest? We're a whole tribe rather than just one house. And of course, the Levi's like, because he's out for himself, because we already know he's not following God's will. He's not a Cohen. He's not a descendant of Aaron. He cannot be priest, not rightfully. In fact, we find out at the end of this chapter that he is actually the grandson of Moses, which definitely means he's not a descendant of Aaron. He is a Levite, but he is not a Cohen. So they are confiscated, they've taken all this, and examples of what the, remember, examples of the carved image that was overlaid with silver, and then this is a drawing of what a cast idol would look like. This is Asherah, this is Baal. These are the nicest versions that I could find of pictures of them. And so they grabbed all this stuff and they're getting ready to leave Micah's household in his land. And we're in 18 verse 21. Putting their little children, their livestock, and their possessions in front of them, they turned away and left. Now, the first time I read this, I was here like, why do they have their little children, their livestock, and finally, after reading it several times and studying it, I'm here like, yeah, they're that sure that they're going to take over Laish. And so they're moving. It's like 600 armed men, but they've brought everything with them because their whole households are with them. And so, then my other question was, why are they putting them in front of them? It's like they're the ones who, I mean, isn't that like a sensitive area to be in front? And if you have to confront somebody, it's little children and livestock and possessions. But then I realized the next section explains, it's like the 600 armed men are at the back. Okay? So they're at the back of the crowd and they're heading out. Verse 22. When they had gone some distance from Micah's house, the men who lived near Micah were called together and overtook the Danites. As they shouted after them, the Danites turned and said to Micah, "What's the matter with you that you called out your men to fight?" And he replied, "You took my gods, the gods I made, and my priest, and went away. What else do I have? How can you ask what's the matter with you?" And the Danites answered, "Don't argue with us, or some hot-tempered men will attack you, and you and your family will lose your lives." So the Danites went their way, and Micah, seeing that they were too strong for him, turned around and went back home. Stop there for a sec. So the 600 armed men are at the back of the whole procession. And so when Micah and his neighbors come rushing after them, trying to get his priest and his idols back, he's confronted with 600 armed men. And that's why they're in this order of procession. It's the fighting guys are in the back because they know that Micah's going to come, because they've just stolen tens of thousands of dollars worth of idols plus his priest. So it's kind of, they know he's coming, but he sees this crowd and there's no way that he and his neighbors can fight 600 armed Danites. So he turns around and goes home. Verse 27. Then they took what Micah had made and his priest and went on to Laish against a peaceful and unsuspecting people. They attacked them with the sword and burned down their city. There was no one to escape to rescue them because they lived a long way from Sidon and had no relationship with anyone else. The city was in a valley near Beth Rehob. The Danites rebuilt the city and settled there. They named it Dan after their forefather Dan, who was born to Israel, Jacob. Though the city used to be called Laish, there the Danites set up for themselves the idols, and Jonathan, son of Gershom, the son of Moses, there he is, that Levite is the grandson of Moses, so just, it's like, if you have grandchildren and you're worried about it, don't be complacent, because they just might not have a clue if it's not for you sharing and teaching and telling your children and then your grandchildren. Because here we see Moses' grandson is already, he's acting like a priest, and he's a priest with false gods. Hello? Those 10 commandments, one of them, no graven images, no other gods before him. It's like, he is the one and only God? Yeah. So then, let's see. I'm going to reread 30. There the Danites set up for themselves the idols, and Jonathan, son of Gershom, and the son of Moses, and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the time of the captivity of the land. They continued to use the idols Micah had made all the time the house of God was in Shiloh. And that's the end of chapter 18. I want to show you a little thing. They named the town Dan. Time. Dan. Laish. Dan. It's the furthest north city. Excavation. There is, they have architecture, archaeologists have found where Dan, the ruins of Dan are. And I have a couple of pictures. And also, they found around the corner from the most recent city of Dan, they find a very ancient city wall gate that is supposed to be the first city that Abraham would have walked into in what would later become the Promised Land, the furthest northern entrance into the future Promised Land. And I have pictures of that too. But here's Dan, way up here. Remember, the land that the Danites are supposed to have is right here. And they're up here in Naphtali's area. It's like, yeah, you're stealing from a brother tribe, and because it's too tough to fight off the I think it's the Amorites in their land. They're going to go to this unsuspecting place up north. Of course, they are pagans, so they do win because it is God's plan for them to have the Promised Land. But it's like, really? I have a few other comments I wanted to, it's like, okay. Dan, it says, oh yeah, the other thing. It says that they were priests there, the descendants of this Levite, his descendants, which means they're all descendants of Moses, pretend to be, because they aren't real, even though they think they are and act like they're real, they're not real priests, but they pretend to be priests. It does say, as long as the house of the Lord was in Shiloh, and that's where the house of the Lord was. That's Shiloh. That's where the tabernacle was set up at the time, and later, if you know about the split of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom after King Saul, David, and Solomon, and it splits into Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Rehoboam in the northern kingdom, he doesn't want his people to go into Jerusalem to worship God, so he creates two places to worship God, which is false places, because the only place to worship him at that time was the temple in Jerusalem. But in 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 28 through 30. Oh, there you This is what Rehoboam, the first king of the north, did. After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves, reminiscent of those 10 Commandments time. He said to the people, "It is too much for you to go to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." What? One he set up in Bethel, and the other in Dan. And this thing became a sin. The people went even as far as Dan to worship the one there. They would rather go all the way up to Dan than back then the temple was in Jerusalem. He put 1 golden calf in Bethel and 1 in Dan. So you went to whichever one you wanted, but not Jerusalem. Don't go to Jerusalem. That's in another kingdom. So Dan basically becomes the place of false worship for God. This is part of the ruins of Dan. And there we go. Part of the altar in the ruins of Dan. And then this is that ancient gateway that they're pretty sure Abraham walked through. So those are some pictures of that part of the country. And that's the end of chapter 18. But I want us to go quickly back to chapter 3. And we're going to look at our first judge. It's only verses 7 through 11. Very short period. But before we go there, now that we have read part of the way people were not worshiping God correctly, the way that they were treating each other, stealing from each other, and showing no trust in the real God. And it's the beginning of this cycle. Remember this cycle. And other words to describe the cycle would be they rebel against God, they backslide, and then they are punished, they are oppressed. Then they find themselves in distress and they cry out, and then God delivers them with a shofet. He shows mercy and sends a judge, a deliverer, a rescuer, and then they have peace for the lifetime of the judge. So now let's look in chapter 3, beginning with verse 7. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asherahs. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, so that he sold them into the hands of Cushan Rishathaim, king of Aram Naharaim. Aram Naharaim is Mesopotamia. It's basically, and I actually looked it up on the internet, and I did not print it out. If you look at the Tigris and Euphrates River, Aram, what's the name of it again? Aram Naharaim is basically the land between the two rivers. Let's see, this way. This way. Up, and then a little little bubble at the top. So it's basically, if you follow the rivers up, and then there's a bubble, and that was Aram Naharaim. And so he allowed the king of that area in Mesopotamia to come, and as it continues, to whom the Israelites were subject for 8 years. They were under his thumb for 8 years. But when they cried out to the Lord, he raised up for them a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, who saved them. Remember Othniel in chapter 1 was the one who Caleb said, whichever man takes this city, I will give my daughter as bride, as wife for him. And Othniel did it. and won and became, this is Old Testament, not only is he the nephew of Caleb, because he is the younger brother's son, but he is now the son-in-law of Caleb. But Caleb was one of those who was strong in faith in God. Remember, Joshua and Caleb were the two spies, the original 12 spies that went into the promised land decades and decades ago when they first got out of Egypt. And Caleb and Joshua trusted God and said, we can take it with God, we can take this land. And no one else believed them. Well, then when they entered the promised land, Joshua became the leader. Caleb was also an old man now, and he said, hey, I'll take the toughest area and I will beat them because God is with me and God has promised it, and it happened. So obviously, Othniel, who was raised by, who's the son of Caleb's younger brother, was raised with faith in God, a trusting, a true faith in God. Where others failed God, Othniel was true. That family line apparently really stuck with God, with everything that's going around them. The example we saw in chapter 17 and 18, all that's going around them. People are worshiping false gods, and Othniel is true, and he becomes the first judge. And here we're going to continue. I'm going to start again with verse 9 and just read through 11. But when they cried out to the Lord, he raised up for them a deliverer, Shaphat, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, who saved them. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him so that he became Israel's judge, Shaphat, rescuer, and went to war. The Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. So the land had peace for 40 years until Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. He brings in Othniel. They have peace. And then he dies, until he dies. And that's where we're going to stop today. Because next lesson, we're jumping to chapter 19. And if you thought 17 and 18 were kind of, they were kind of like a PG-13 when we were talking about the gods and goddesses and how you worship them. 19 to 21, there's a lot of R-rated stuff going on. Gruesome, physical assaults, to put it in a delicate way. So you might want to make sure you know who's listening in the background for part of that study. I'm just giving you the heads up, and I'll warn you again at the beginning of that one. There are assaults, multiple assaults on a woman, and a lot of death, tens of thousands, and cutting up, bodies and stuff. So So we'll see you next time. Your homework is to read 3 chapters, 19, 20, 21. Get yourself acclimated and to have a basic idea of what we're going to be looking at. And with that, I say adieu, adios, goodbye, until the next time.